Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at IXION, an upcoming sci-fi space colony management game that puts you in charge of finding a new home for humanity after life on Earth has become unsustainable. I had a chance to play the demo during Steam Next Fest back in late February, and the game left me quite intrigued about where it's headed from a narrative perspective, while bringing in elements from one of my favorite games in the genre of recent years, Frostpunk. One of the co-founders of Bulwark Studios, developers of IXION, has gone so far as to state the inspiration clearly, and that's great to hear and see. Good ideas spawning more good ideas. There are quite a few details to discuss from my time with the game, and I'll occasionally look to Frostpunk as potential reference of how some things might work where the demo left things open to interpretation. Of course, if you have any thoughts of your own you'd like to share, or any questions or concerns, leave them in the comments down below, as I'd love to see them and respond to what I can. As always, also remember to wishlist the game on Steam if you find it compelling. It's a great way to show your support for the developers, to let them know you're interested, and it's also a way to get the game some visibility on the platform while keeping a track of it yourself too. But for now, without further ado, let's begin. A compelling narrative. The narrative aspect of IXION is not to be ignored or set aside, in my opinion. Truth be told, the ominous story set up by the trailer was the thing that piqued my curiosity most when it was first revealed, and the way the demo introduces all the characters has a great air of mystery about it, and the way the demo ended piqued my curiosity even further, basically acting as a prologue to the trailer we saw a handful of months ago. You work for Dolos, a major corporation whose CEO has seen the need for humanity to extend beyond Earth. With the planet reaching its limits and life continuing to grow at an unsustainable rate, this CEO and his corporation have built a space station, the Tiqued, which, equipped with the first ever Vol engine, will partake in an interstellar journey to the closest world that might potentially act as a new home. A perilous journey, under your command and the watchful gaze of the Marduk Council, the people that seem to be invested in this journey, financially or otherwise. To get to your destination, you'll be traveling from system to system, acquiring resources as you push further into space, but as the demo hinted, there seems to be something afoot. Members of the Marduk Council seem less interested in human life, and more so on the effects of space travel on human life. Their conversation about the Vol engine powering your ship's journey, and how it might accelerate early onset dementia, for example, is very flippant, as if you were guinea pigs and lab rats, and some of the optional elements that you could explore in the demo had implications that you aren't actually the corporation's first attempt at using the Vol engine. Like I said, there's a mystery afoot, perhaps plenty, and the demo ends with your departure literally shattering the moon as shown in the trailers, and a sense of foreboding for what might come next. The ins and outs of the station. At the core of the game is Tiqued Station itself, and you need to ensure it's kept running on all cylinders at all times. Between its exterior hardpoints and its interior ring sections, you'll need to balance resources, power, and workers' well-being, ensuring each ring section can work optimally in isolation if need be, but also building in fail-safes, redundancies, and systems to transport needs and wants from one section to another where needed. While each section will have its performance and output tracked separately, and while certain items like backup batteries operate on a per-section level, there are buildings that allow you to ferry resources and workers between the various sections. Now, to start, you'll only have access to one section, and as you acquire more resources, you'll be able to use them to unlock more sections, giving you more space to work with as you establish additional manufacturing, habitation, and research facilities. Exterior facilities work a little differently, as upgrades to your engines or solar panels aren't restricted to unlocked sections of the station, but they do require separate sets of technology and buildings to be possible in the first place. EVA suits and buildings that facilitate work on the exterior are needed before you can work on said exterior, and resources used to build external modules are similar to the ones, if not exactly the same as the ones, used to build internal modules, and that means you'll have to balance your priorities accordingly. Hull integrity will play a key role as traveling deteriorates it, and naturally, if the hull is destroyed, the mission and your playthrough is over. I wouldn't be surprised if there are plans to have other activities and dangers that cause damage to your hull as well. Perhaps particularly dangerous but lucrative destinations cause extra damage, or maybe turmoil inside the station could cause trouble too. Trust is another key factor you'll have to keep an eye on. It's not just about the hull integrity, but your integrity too. Managing the level of trust that the station's population has in you and the corporation on a per-section basis, trying to avoid mutinies and general disorder. Trust wasn't really put to the test in the Next Fest demo, but in theory, it'll function similar to Frostpunk's hope and discontent mechanics, as the game is, again, certainly inspired by Frostpunk, and I'm curious to see exactly how that plays out. The human element is one of my favorite aspects of Frostpunk, and if IXION comes even close to scratching that same itch, I think there's going to be plenty of room for fun. I'd mentioned previously that the game already makes mention of the potential health concerns of prolonged time in space, and I want to see the game tackle those topics and saddle the player with moral dilemmas with no correct answer, so to speak, only different paths to an end goal. A few dilemmas showed up in the demo, but they were mostly used to assign tutorial objectives to the player, only somewhat showing the storytelling and dramatic potential of choice and consequence. This can certainly be pushed quite far, twisting the player's arm one way or another, and it can also encourage replayability if there are enough viable branching paths worth exploring. Beyond conversations about the people in your station, the game does a great job representing the cramped and claustrophobic spaces, using it to limit how neatly you can place items if you haven't thought far enough ahead, and it uses ideas like access to the exterior sections of the ship or to other segments of the ring as something that you need to contend with as well. IXION isn't satisfied just being set in space. Many survival colony builders and city builders are essentially just the same gameplay concepts with a different backdrop, but here we have that backdrop directly influencing gameplay elements and mechanics. With a unique setting come unique expectations, and in quite a few different ways, IXION seems to be embracing that challenge well. Resource management in the void of space. As you're hurtling through space, seeking a new home for humanity, you can imagine the need to stay stocked up on the finer things in life, like food and perhaps water. Typically, space isn't the ideal place to find either of these things, and so you'll need to try and produce them on the station. In order to do so, you'll need to do a combination of acquiring resources from asteroids and then processing them at buildings in the station. In order to do all this, you'll need a few moving parts working in tandem. In certain rare occasions, as shown in the Next Fest demo for example, you'll be able to use cargo ships to ferry goods over from support vessels or other third parties. In other cases, and probably more often, you'll need to send mining ships out to mine asteroids, each with their own potential yields of a few different resource types, and then you'll need to use cargo ships in order to actually ship those goods from the mining location over to the station. Space mining involves investing in and building these mining and cargo ships, assigning them appropriate tasks, and letting the AI take control over the micromanagement of aspects as you deal with what happens when the resources actually arrive back on the station. Optimal pathing from the drop-off points to the stockpiles where the goods are stored helps speed things along, and you'll want to manage your stockpile locations too, especially since each stockpile building can only hold one type of resource, and transporting resources between ring sections takes additional, separate buildings alongside more time and effort. Resources in IXION are all physicalized, meaning they have to be moved from the stockpile where they're stored over to where they're needed, be it food, water, construction materials, or raw materials for processing. On which topic, iron gets processed into alloys using a steel mill, and alloys are needed to build structures. Carbon mined off of asteroids can be converted into polymers at the polymer refinery to then produce solar panels and spaceships. Silicon can be turned into electronics at the electronics factory, needed for advanced buildings and general station advancements. Hydrogen from asteroids is needed to power nuclear power plants, while ice from asteroids become water at water stations, after which the water itself is needed either just as water or to help produce food at appropriate production buildings. Food then is stored at stockpiles, but served from a refectory. while waste is produced by factories and food production buildings and can be converted into the aforementioned resource types if you have the right facilities. Over time, you'll be unlocking more such facilities and hoping to optimize them as undoubtedly resources get more sparse and your luck starts to run dry. As I said earlier, the trust mechanic wasn't really put to the test in the Next Fest demo, but it's not too hard to see how it could come into play if you start running out of food, or if you stop paying attention to the flow of resources in and around your station. With a need to rely on external factors to provide some core resources too, you can imagine the need to be proactive in seeking out new deposits and making sure you're taking advantage of limited availability and are otherwise prepared for unfortunate and most likely inevitable circumstances. Exploration and research. As you push deep into the final frontier, you'll have to rely more and more on efficiently exploiting what it has to offer, and in order to do so, you'll need to build and research the appropriate facilities and pursue the appropriate points of interest. I pair these two things together because exploration is one of the key ways to enable research, but exploration is also required for other activities, such as the aforementioned acquisition of resources. The Next Fest demo focused entirely on our solar system, and the player was able to send science ships out to explore a couple of points of interest, and in fact had to explore most of them in order to proceed. They showed some breadth and variety, each gave you some decision-making and storytelling, and the decisions were a matter of balancing time, reward, material cost, and, in at least one occasion, a light bit of morality. I'm personally quite interested in seeing that latter piece explored more as the game goes on. It is again one of the things that stood out most to me in Frostpunk, and I love when morality is explored in these kinds of dire and fantastical circumstances. Supposedly, some events can see science ships lose crew, making them less efficient, and I'd like to see how these story beats play out. With that said, the narrative elements are also interesting, and seeing a city builder or colony manager embrace narrative aspects and partake in storytelling is a compelling approach in my books. There are cases where you're asked to assist with other missions, and there's at least one point of interest where you see that things might not be exactly as they seem. Apart from all this though, one of the uses for the science ships you build and deploy is to work alongside your tech labs and help acquire the science needed to research new technologies, which in turn enable you to perform more activities or otherwise be more sustainable. As is usually the challenge with these types of games, your self-sustainability becomes more important the further you go, and your ability to efficiently acquire essential resources or perform essential tasks will make the difference between success and failure. Docking bays can be upgraded to operate faster or store more resources. Solar panels can be made cheaper to produce, more resistant to damage during storms, or more efficient in energy production. Batteries can be researched to store and distribute power in case of a blackout. Crew quarters can be made denser or more productive. You can acquire new production facilities, access to new kinds of protein, law enforcement, sources of entertainment, and even the buildings for a cult that might form aboard the station. As you can imagine, this has definitely piqued my curiosity about where the story goes even further. The tech web here seems limited only because there are layers hidden behind each click, so just keep that in mind as you look at this screen. It goes way deeper than it first appears, and there are these mysterious question marks hiding little secrets too. Probe launchers will help you scan for opportunities, and as your ships scout them more closely and take advantage of them, it's clear that IXION wants to be about more than just what happens in the station or on its exterior alone. You'll be concerned with natural phenomena in space, you'll be moving the station around at the cost of wear and tear, and you'll be exploring multiple systems on your way over to this beacon of hope far, far away. Whether the dangers come from within or without, it's clearly not going to be an uneventful journey. IXION is a very interesting looking game. I'm a big fan of the genre, from the gameplay to the setting itself, and if it pushes those narrative and moral angles in the right way while providing more of what the demo had on offer as far as gameplay is concerned, I think it's well worth keeping an eye on. The demo did a great service to the narrative elements especially, and I'm curious to see just how complex and tense the game gets further along. The right kind and level of tension makes these games come alive in my books, and a lot will rest on that aspect of things. It's very easy for a game like this to sort of fall into a bit of a rut where you're just going through the processes, you're just repeating the same tasks over and over. So if the challenge scales accordingly and if the tension mounts accordingly as you go on, things get very, very interesting. And I'm curious to see how all that plays out in IXION. Hopefully I'll have my hands on it before the game actually releases so I can talk about it, show it off a bit more, and even maybe do a review. If you want to keep up with IXION, don't hesitate to wishlist it yourself on Steam as well. And if you'd like to keep up with it and strategy, management, and sim games in general, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.